Now, if you want the purest proof that the white supremacists understand themselves to be in a race war against us and that they're feeling the heat, they're starting to feel themselves being put on the defensive, that they understand that they're taking some L's, you need look no farther than racist Richard Burr, who apparently had a burr up his wrinkled backside. The NCAA announced today that they were going to cave to the righteous demands of the black athletes and that finally these kids were going to be able to actually earn money off of their names and images and likenesses the same way that the white schools and these white corporations have been. Now the black athletes are going to be getting a piece of the action. You can tell that the same racist mindset of the white Southern plantation owner and his Yankee legislative enablers is alive and well today. You had North Carolina's own Republican Senator Richard Burr, who tweeted out immediately after this news broke. He immediately tweets out, if college athletes are going to make money off their likenesses while in school, their scholarships should be treated like income. I'll be introducing legislation that subjects scholarships given to athletes who choose to cash in to income taxes. Oh, now you notice the wording that he used. See, this is what the Republicans have always done, and the Democrats have allowed them to do it and even backed them on many occasions. The same way that the Republicans will look at voter districts, and if they see the black enclaves there, how do we corral the black vote? Draw it up in such a way as to split the black vote, to make it where the black vote becomes ineffective in the places that they live, so as to limit the ability of black people to have legislators who look like them. Oh, we need to write some laws that make it where we can outlaw black people voting in all but name. This is the same thing. This is the economic academic equivalent of that. We're going to craft laws specifically aimed at black people, but we're going to say that it's towards just a particular group in general. We're not going to say that it's black people, but everyone will know who it's actually aimed at. And in practice, that's who it's going to be aimed at. So we're not going to worry about the Mark Zuckerbergs or the Steve Jobs, how much money these white kids are making when they get scholarships and go to college. We're not going to worry about what income they get. They can cash in all they want. This is about making sure that the black students don't. And Richard Burr's a Republican. Well, whatever happened to government needs to have a light touch and government needs to tax less? Weren't the Republicans, I thought, supposed to be the party of low taxes and no taxes and let the market decide? Well, the market has decided that the black athletes ought to get paid. And Richard Burr is saying, I don't like it personally. So this is what happens to white supremacist so-called principles whenever they get tested. You want to test a white supremacist principles, let them see a black person, specifically black men. Let them see black men actually making a profit. And you'll find out exactly what they believe. Richard Burr, as far as he's concerned, to hell with conservative principles. To hell with the Republican Party's standards on taxes. Well, this is going to be only toward black men, so it doesn't really matter. He does not care at all that what he's doing is opening the door to scholarships in general, even for white kids, scholarships being taken as nothing more than a form of income. But as far as he's concerned, well, it won't get farther than that because the Democrats and Republicans will be on the same page about what this is really about. And don't kid yourself, there's more than a few Democrats looking at this Richard Burr clown and saying, yeah, that'd be a good idea. There's more than a few Democrats who, as far as they're concerned, yeah, well, Democrat principles, we're talking about for white people. That doesn't have anything to do with black people. You better get realistic about this. So for all you idiots out there talking about how black folks need to vote GOP and, oh, the Democrats, they don't listen to us, we need to vote Republican. Yeah, you can go ahead and keep Richard Burr in office. You can go ahead and help him stay in office a little bit longer. Fools. But this is what's going on right now. The white supremacists are nutting up because they're looking at saying, wait a minute here. We don't believe in black folks being able, especially black men, being able to make any economic gains. They should not get their way in any shape, form, or fashion on anything. Because to black people, we're looking and going, well, up against the economic enormity of white supremacy's financial resources, the NCAA's little gesture doesn't mean anything, not up against the totality of white supremacy's finances, but you got to see it the way the white supremacists do. They understand that they put together a house of cards. White supremacy is a lie. It is a con. And they're terrified that someone's going to put a little bit of pressure on their house of cards because that's all it would take to bring the whole damn thing down. They understand that. They get that. So they can't allow anything to be happening that might be advantageous to black people. They can't allow any of it. Today, what's going to happen is the NCAA caves in. Tomorrow, reparations will be law. And speaking of reparations being law, that brings us to the asinine so-called article, which was nothing more than a thinly veiled hit piece put out by Politico. They decided that they were going to give away some worthless web space to some clown named Stuart Eisenstadt. This guy, by the way, he had been part of Jimmy Carter's administration, just so you know. And this guy wrote a anti-reparations attack piece called What Holocaust Restitution Taught Me About Slavery Reparations. I'll save you the trouble of reading it. What he said was that Holocaust reparations were valid and necessary and deserved, and slavery reparations are just black people wanting something for nothing. This is supposed to be a Jewish man writing this. What he wrote was that there really is no basis for slavery reparations, and well, if there was going to be a case made, it should have been made 150 years ago. Oh, you mean when the Supreme Court was handing down rulings that said that a black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect? Yeah, like the right to redress of grievances, things like that. And the Supreme Court was saying, we don't give a damn what your basis is. And this Eisenstadt character's saying, well, you should have made the case then. You waited too long. And why should we listen to this Eisenstadt character? What are his qualifications that we should listen to him when it comes to the greatest crime in human history? Well, because he took part in negotiations regarding a human rights atrocity against Jews. And since he himself is Jewish, that means that qualifies him to speak on what it is that black people are owed, because he's Jewish. And I guess now, the natural answer to that is to say, so what difference does that make? That doesn't mean anything. Well, what he's playing on is, and what he likes to play up is, well, I'm not a white Gentile. I'm a white Semite. I'm Jewish. And well, Jews were done wrong by these white Gentiles, and well, I'm not one of them. So, if the white Gentiles and the white Jews are in agreement on something, that means it must be right. That's what he's playing on. So you got this guy who in one breath will tell you that the Jews were done wrong by white Gentiles, not by black people. Black people didn't carry out the Holocaust. It was white Gentiles who did. And yet in the very next breath, he wants to play on the idea of, well, it's because I'm Jewish that when I speak on this, I should be seen as an authority. I don't have my facts in order. I don't know what I'm talking about. But merely the fact that I come from a group who had been oppressed by these white Gentiles for about 5 years, not 500 years, for 5 years. Well, that means you ought to listen to me. So that's what he's playing on. A man who, to hear him tell it, took part in negotiating with national governments to get restitution for people who had been wronged simply because of an incidental characteristic such as religious belief. This is a man who, to hear him tell it, he's a man who stands a moral conscience and well, he stood up for people who had become the targets of a malignant government. He represented the descendants of Holocaust survivors, not just Holocaust survivors themselves, but he also represented the descendants of the Holocaust survivors. And his talking point for that was, well, they stand in the shoes of their ancestors who had been wronged. So that was his talking point when it was fellow Jews that he was representing. He had no problem with the idea that, well, the people who were wronged, they're not here to collect, but their children are, and that's good enough for me. Decades later, he had no problem with time. He had no problem with how much time had passed or with how many people who were directly wronged who were no longer there. He had no problem with that as long as it was fellow Jews. But as soon as you say black people, all of a sudden, well, that's not valid. Well, what's not valid about it? It's black people. That means it's not valid. That's where he's coming from. He didn't actually give anything even remotely academic to back up his empty denials. What he basically said over and over again, what he typed out and scribbled in this screed was, I personally don't like it. I personally don't approve of it, just like Senator What's-His-Name. He couldn't actually say what was wrong with these young people being compensated, even just like their white counterparts do. He couldn't say what was wrong with it, just that I personally don't like it. I'm white, and I say so. Oh, we're learning a lot about who our allies are these days now, aren't we? But it was just basically the same old boilerplate nonsense that you hear from any unthinking clod in a comment section. Apparently, Donald Trump's not the only idiot who gets his talking points from internet comment sections. Apparently, this Eisenstadt character, he must spend a lot of time on Yahoo or Stormfront. But if you just want one of this guy's pearls of stupidity, here's one for you. He wrote, the best model for helping overcome prejudice and hate is South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Hey, you guys remember the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? You know, the one that didn't do a damn thing, where nobody got punished and what have you? Its mandate from Nelson Mandela included neither financial compensation for apartheid nor punitive measures against its white perpetrators. Now, this guy, he just gives one argument after the next, and then he contradicts his argument with the very next thing that he says. Like when he said we need a similar commission in the United States, not for divisive individual or group compensation. Oh, so for black people to be compensated for the greatest crime in human history, that would be divisive. Okay, so he's suggesting something because he doesn't want to be divisive. Then in the very next sentence, he says, I'm not saying this will all be easy or that it won't be politically divisive. But he just said that cash payouts would be divisive, so he suggests a Truth and Reconciliation Commission because that would avoid resentment and the risk of making racism even worse. Then he goes on to say, well, I'm not saying that that won't be divisive. You see what he's doing? In one breath, he says that you don't want a situation where black people are pushing the country into something that would be divisive. And then the very next sentence he says, well, I'm not saying that my suggestion, my proposal wouldn't be divisive. But he said earlier on that South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission was able to avoid resentment and a risk of making racism even worse. And notice that duplicitous racist language there. Curbing resentment, not black resentment. You look at the economic divide in South Africa today, it's as bad as it ever was. The white people are living in fine homes and the black folks are living in shanties, which of course is exactly what Eisenstadt wants. And there goes that favorite phrase of the white supremacists. You know, if you do something that black people like, it's going to make racism even worse. We can't punish the Klan. Why, that would make racism even worse. We can't have affirmative action. That would make racism even worse. We can't integrate these institutions and we can't rein in these white supremacists. Why, that would just make racism even worse. Anything that punishes the white supremacists would make racism worse. That's a threat, is what they're saying. What they're saying is, we're going to retaliate. You call yourself reining in the white man and we're going to retaliate. That's what, and this is coming from Eisenstadt. This is supposed to be a Jewish liberal, and this is what he's coming out with. Why, if you punish the white supremacists, why, if you do anything that's seen as retribution against them, I told you that the soul of justice is retribution. You cannot have justice without an element of retribution. Retribution is part of justice. When people violate the law, when people violate moral norms, they're supposed to be punished and they're supposed to know they're being punished. And Eisenstadt, notice how he didn't have any objections to the Nuremberg trials. He didn't have any objections to the Nazis being hanged. He didn't have any objections to that. He didn't say, well, you know what? What Germany needed was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That would have been the best thing. And hey, when it comes to Islamic extremists, he's not suggesting, well, you know, what the Israelis need is to pursue a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Why do we need to take direct retribution against Hamas or Hezbollah or any anti-Semitic organizations in the Middle East? Why, that's only going to create more resentment. Is going to make the anti-Semitism worse. That's never the default. But when talking to black people, you better not do anything that punishes the white supremacists for their violence against you, because that will only make racism worse. Nobody ever says, hey, look at these blue lives matter laws that you're passing. The cops are gunning down unarmed black people, and you're passing laws to encourage them to keep doing it. This is only going to make racism worse. Hey, you can't, somebody needs to tell that Senator Burr character that you can't pass any laws that are penalizing athletes for getting scholarships. Why, this will only make racism worse. Nobody ever says that where black people's interests are concerned. Nobody ever says you do something that displeases black people, that's going to make racism worse. That's never the default. Instead, it's you better not do anything that is deleterious to the interests of the white supremacists, and you better not do anything that might be even remotely advantageous to the interests of black people, or that will make racism worse. So you have both Republicans and a so-called liberal, and a Jewish liberal at that, on the exact same page. You can't tell which one is which because both of them are white supremacists. There is no difference between them. Oh, well, one of them is a good old boy Christian from the South, and the other one is a Jewish liberal from the Midwest. When it comes to white supremacy, that's a distinction without a difference. The hatred and the racism isn't based on their religion. It's based on the fact that they see themselves as race soldiers prosecuting a war against us. And they will tell any lie, promote any falsehood, push any fallacy, and cover up any truth in furtherance of that race war. Was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission successful at avoiding resentment and making racism worse, or was it divisive? I would love to call this word salad, but this is so jumbled up, you might as well call it verbal diarrhea, because that's the best description for it. This guy doesn't know if he's coming or going. He recommends copying South Africa's disastrous Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was nothing more than a white supremacist get-out-of-jail-free card. He would never suggest that for Jews, by the way. He would never suggest the best thing to help overcome anti-Semitism is South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now, as far as he's concerned, that ain't good enough for Jews. Jews need to know that anti-Semites are punished. But black people, well, we need to avoid making racism even worse. We don't want the white supremacists to be resentful. Well, if you punish the white supremacists, it won't matter what they think. Well, we got to consider the white supremacists, don't you know? He would never allow anybody to get away with saying, well, we don't want to make anti-Semitism worse by direct retribution against the anti-Semites. He would never condone that. He would never say that is okay. He would never go for that. But that's what he's telling us. So you got a good old boy from North Carolina, this Richard Burr character, and you have a Jew from Illinois, this Eisenstadt character, and both of these two, a Anglo-Christian good old boy from the South and a Jew from the Midwest, could not possibly be more different until it comes to talking about black folks and tangibles. Then all of a sudden there's neither air nor light between them. Black people actually supported reparations for Jews. There were black people who were instrumental in the formation of the State of Israel. Walter White, who had been the chairman of the NAACP in the 40s, he was part of the U.S. delegation that helped to get Israel recognized as a state in the 1940s. I suppose Mr. Eisenstadt forgot about that, or as far as he's concerned, that was a minor historical footnote that need not be remembered. But I want black folks to understand what's going on here. As we have raised the issue of our tangibles and are making progress, you're seeing that this is exactly what I told you needs to happen. Reparations is a wonderful political tool because it serves a variety of needs, a variety of purposes. And one of them, forcing all of these phony baloney supposed allies, these people who try to perpetrate a fraud and pretend like they're on our side, it forces everyone to lay their cards on the table and admit where they really stand. Oh, I'm sure Mr. Eisenstadt would love for everybody to think that he's just the most liberal Jew who ever lived. Until you get to this. When you start bringing up tangibles, all of a sudden, Mr. Eisenstadt, we don't need that. The fool doesn't care how much he contradicts himself because his audience is not black people. This audience is aimed at white people, and he is lending what he thinks to be the good offices of, black people would say that if the Jews got reparations, they should too. Well, I was involved. I was one of the negotiators for Holocaust reparations, and I say these niggers don't have a case. That's what his entire so-called piece said. It was just one repetition of every brain-dead talking point you ever saw. Well, that was a long time ago. He even was dumb enough to put in there that, well, black people would have to pay for reparations too. I mean, it's their tax dollars. Now, nobody would ever say, gee, what about the Jews who are still in Europe? The Jews who were in Germany in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s and beyond, they're having to have their tax dollars go to pay their own reparations. Nobody would ever say, gee, the German government's bribing you with your own money. Nobody would ever say that. Eisenstadt didn't say that. Never came up, never got mentioned. But when he comes to us, all of a sudden, well, black people would perversely wind up having their money go to pay for a crime that they didn't commit. Well, considering that our tax dollars went to go pay for Native Americans for a crime we didn't commit, Japanese Americans for a crime we didn't commit, and Jewish Americans for a crime we didn't commit. Hell, we're used to it by now. So much for our liberal allies, huh? I want black folks to understand what's going on here. You got two individuals who are supposed to be coming from different ends of the political spectrum. This Eisenstadt character was part of the Jimmy Carter administration. And this Burr character is a lifelong Republican. They don't agree on anything, except we got to make sure that black people get no tangibles whatsoever. It's a war to make sure we keep the black man on his knees. Both of them can agree about that.